Hi, I'm Emma.
And I'm Helena, and we both work at the MS Trust. Just a little disclaimer, we're recording this over Zoom because of coronavirus and social distancing, so apologies if the sound is a bit iffy at any stage. Please do bear with us.
We'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Multiple Sclerosis, Breaking It Down, and this new series that we've called Me, Myself and I, which focuses on people with MS stories over the past year. So why this topic? Well, the last 12 months have been unlike any other in so many ways. On top of the social restrictions, worries about job security and the health of family and friends, people with MS have also had to contend with delays to the MS services they rely on. The MS Trust want to highlight the people and faces behind the statistics. We want to impress the urgent need to get MS services back on track by showing that there's a human story behind each person mentioned in these figures.
So in this series, we'll be meeting some people with MS and hearing their stories from the past year. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about the role of key workers during lockdown.
I recently spoke with Mel, who was diagnosed with MS a few years ago, but continued to work in the NHS throughout the past 12 months.
Wow, that must have been really quite challenging for her.
Yeah, I think we've sort of heard quite a lot about the pressures and challenges that's been put upon key workers during this time, but in particular those sort of in the healthcare sector over the course of lockdown, really. Of course, this has had an impact on patients as well. How have you found your access to MS services has been, Helena?
I think it was definitely a difference between the first lockdown at the beginning of the pandemic and then the last few months. Because at the start, I think I sent off some email and just got sort of back that it would take a little while. And you could definitely see that, a lot of people probably were deployed elsewhere and they were helping out where they needed to be. So the contact was a bit more sporadic then. My face-to-face appointment got cancelled. So I had an appointment during the summer, which was just over phone, which was fine. I've heard other people who've had Zoom consultations, which I think might be more useful than phone calls if you want to show, you want to show someone, but that you're struggling with something is always easier to do it on camera. But yeah, so I when I had bloods taken for my for the DMD that I'm on, I had to go. The first time I went to like a medical center, which wasn't the normal hospital, but like a private hospital, which they were using, and it was very well set up. There wasn't much waiting time or anything. And the second time I had my bloods taken, it was through like a drive-through. So we drove up to an unused ice rink where they were all set up, which was very strange. And you put your arm through the window and then they took some blood. And they were super fast, it was really easy. A bit different, but I don't necessarily know if it was worse or better than sitting and waiting, at the MS nurse to have it done. It was probably faster in all honesty. So I feel it's been overall, it's been okay for me. I feel like it would have helped to have gone to see maybe the neurologist to sort of do the normal checkup where they check things like the EDSS and stuff, because then they will put, they will test pressure and things like that. You can't do that over the phone. But the MS nurse appointments themselves were okay to do the way they did it.
Yeah, I think that's what we've heard quite a lot of recently, isn't it? Where there's been a real mixed bag of experiences, and some people say, going forward, actually, I'd quite like to take some of the new ways that we've been working recently and some of the older ways and combine them together, and that might be the best option going forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so. Learn from this year, but try to sort of make sure that people who do need to see their nurse in person can still do so.
So shall we hear a little bit firsthand about what it was like to work in the NHS during a global pandemic? Here's what Mel had to say when we spoke to her. So the past 12 months have seen people all around the world adapting to life in ways that we would have once found difficult to believe. Here in the UK, we've heard of numerous creative projects, hobbies and challenges being undertaken in a bid to help us get through lockdown, but it hasn't all been easy. Today I'm talking to Mel, a nurse who continued to work throughout this time while seeking distraction in the form of baking, homeschooling, spending time with family and video gaming. Hi Mel, it's lovely to speak with you today.
Hi.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself to start with?
Yep. So I'm 43 and I live in North Yorkshire with my husband Dean and my 2 teenage boys and a crazy little dog, Jack Russell called Zeus. And I've worked as a nurse for nearly 22 years.
Oh wow, so yeah, quite a while then.
Yeah, quite a while. Yeah, I kind of worked it out before we spoke today. Like, oh yes.
Yeah, I think time just sort of goes, and then before you realise it, you're like, oh, it's been however long.
Absolutely.
So are you able to share a little bit around your MS diagnosis with us? Things like when you were first diagnosed and what your main symptoms were?
Yeah, of course. So I was first diagnosed in 2018 after I had an episode of optic neuritis. It was a little turbulent because I went to see a different specialist and he questioned the diagnosis and thought it was maybe clinically isolated syndrome. And then unfortunately then developed further symptoms, leg weakness, foot drop. So it was confirmed sort of 6 months later in sort of spring 2019. And then I went on to have another episode of neuritis, optic neuritis, which then led to sort of me starting medication. And probably like everybody else, you look back and actually I had symptoms back in 2016, had the Lermit's phenomenon, fatigue, and that, at the time was put down to being a nurse, sort of just wear and tear on your back, that kind of thing, when saw a physio and everything. So I think it's just like everybody else, you look back and think, actually, no, those were some symptoms, but they'll put down other things.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think we hear quite a lot of that at the trust, that people, when they look back, as you mentioned, there's little signs that you kind of ignored, but then when you know what it is, it all adds up.
Absolutely. And it was just such a strange symptom with the Lermit's. It was just this buzzing and then this electric shock kind of sensation down your back. But I've been a nurse for years, you wear and tear, a lot of backache now and again. So it was just put down to that when I saw the physio. I think, just thought it was something, a bit inflamed on the spinal cord and it would just go off. And it did. But it took about 9 months. And then that also came back just before my episode of optic neuritis. But again, you ignore it because, you just stick down to what you were told before. So, yeah.
So before we were in lockdown, what did a sort of average day at work look like for you?
So my nursing career sort of ended up being in sort of cancer nurse specialist. And it's very much outpatient based. We did sort of see patients on the ward. My speciality is in GI, so gastrointestinal. So it was supporting patients who have just recently been diagnosed with a GI cancer, right through their treatment, through to end of life and advanced care planning decisions. So it was, very much seeing patients in clinic, speaking to lots of patients over the telephone, advising those, signposting those patients, and basically supporting those. So that was like my average kind of my weekday really, and then my weekends was very much football field really, to be honest, with the 2 boys.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a full-on week, but nice to get that mix of family at the end as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Are both of your sons really into football?
Yeah, my eldest particularly. Yeah, he's kind of really passionate about his football. So he's sort of Saturdays, Sundays, Thursdays. My youngest, he enjoys it, but he's not quite as, he doesn't mind if he misses a match. But Matthew would be highly upset if that was the case. But yeah, they're both really into football and video games and trying to teach me badly.
So just going back to your job during lockdown now, really.
Yeah.
As we mentioned, you continued to sort of work throughout this whole time as a nurse. What was that like, just moving from what it was like pre-lockdown to sort of nowadays?
I think at the beginning, so it was sort of in sort of March time, wasn't it, last year? Everything was ramping up, and as a specialist nursing group, so but all specialities of different kinds of nursing, we were all getting prepared for redeployment, which was obviously quite a stressful time, learning new skills, and then finding out that I needed to kind of step back from direct patient care was so difficult for me personally as a nurse. I found that really difficult to manage. My role sort of did start to change. I sort of supported patients via telephone clinics, moved into different work and more diagnostics at the beginning of a patient's pathway. and then formulating new pathways. It just seemed like policies were changing, daily basis. It felt like in the NHS to manage it all. I was involved in some of that, producing those policies and pathways. It was just so very, very different, stressful. There was that, concern. We didn't know what this was going to do, the impact it was going to have on us and our patients. It was already having an effect for our cancer patients, and that was really difficult because we didn't have the answers for them. And normally, we don't have an answer for everything, but normally I know kind of what's going to happen with the patient's pathway. And it was so difficult. We just didn't know when they were going to get their operation, if they could safely come in for their chemotherapy. It was really difficult. It was a very stressful, mentally exhausting and physically exhausting time.
Are you still finding that you're working in this way, or have things sort of moved back a little bit more
they've settled down. So I've kind of moved at the beginning of the lockdown, I was sort of doing two roles. I was leading the nursing team in the gastrointestinal area, and I was also asked to head up a new pathway, which is sort of what we call rapid diagnostic services. So I was sort of moving into being a nurse practitioner for that. So I've moved over to do that all the time. I've reduced my hours, which I was planning to do anyway, because I was finding it with fatigue just too difficult to manage full-time hours. So I was reducing them anyway. So I've moved into that now. And things, although they're not the same, they certainly seem a lot calmer. There isn't that, not quite knowing what you're going into each day. That's certainly not there, and I feel useful now. That I think was the hardest thing. I felt completely useless as a nurse at the beginning because I didn't feel that I could go out and support my colleagues on intensive care, on the admissions wards, because it's of my MS, and that was horrendous. I've never felt so useless and resentful of MS as I did this time last year.
Yeah, that's a shame that obviously you had to feel like that and you couldn't do what you kind of had hoped to. But it's good to hear that obviously things are starting to get a little bit back to normal, not fully there.
Yeah, they definitely are moving in the right direction. It's the NHS isn't quite the same, but actually I think it has some positives. I think COVID's been able to bring on some changes to services that perhaps would have been years down the line, whereas now that we're able to do it now, and we've got new innovations, there's video appointments and things which are fantastic. So actually I think it's had some huge positives, as well as obviously a very stressful time and difficult.
That's really good, like you say, if there's been some positives as well to take out of it, because I don't think people really think necessarily of that side of lockdown.
No, absolutely not. And I think, when we look back, and we were having just a meeting yesterday, we didn't appreciate, I guess, at the time that changes that we made, we actually have been able to kind of keep up in the future. And I think that is just going to be the biggest positive. And we just seem to be a little bit more advanced in some areas. We've been able to put things in place that we wanted to do but haven't been able to. So I think it has had lots of positives at work, certainly, as well as at home. Actually, been able to spend some time with the kids, which probably wouldn't have done with teenage boys as much. They maybe didn't want to spend some time on a Sunday afternoon playing some games and things like that because they weren't at football. So yeah, that's been quite good.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely a good side of things. So yeah, you sort of touched on this. Did you want to tell us a little bit about some of the new hobbies or routines that you've taken up in the past year and have helped you get through?
I mean, it was to be fair, it was quite exhausting. So the weekends when I was off, it was very much a good fan of Netflix. But I sort of got back into some of my sort of cross stitching. I didn't do banana bread. I know that was a bit of a thing, wasn't it? But I didn't kind of do that. But we were sort of, doing bits and pieces with the boys. They were trying to teach me how to play Rocket League and FIFA unsuccessfully. Still can't quite get that on the Xbox. But we were we were able to do some nice games. And then for myself, I actually, because I just sort of started yoga to help with my balance and mindfulness, I guess, before the lockdown. And I sort of carried that on, and I still do that now, and I find that hugely beneficial. So that's something that I'm not sure I would have perhaps done quite as much of if we hadn't have gone into the lockdown, to be honest with you. So that's been brilliant. really enjoy that. But yeah, just spending time with the boys. They're stuck with us, really, weren't they?
Yeah, it's nice that they sort of have to, although like no one wants to feel stuck anywhere, it's nice that you have to make the most of that time with family.
Absolutely. But you're not going to get that time normally with a 16 and a 13-year-old. It's just not. It's not cool, is it? So
No.
And it was quite nice in many respects. And the weather, we're quite lucky last year, so we're in the garden quite a lot, and it was just yeah. And I made Dean do lots of DIY, so that was good.
Yeah, get all those jobs ticked off that you couldn't normally do. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, yeah.
So what you've sort of mentioned this one. What do you think that you've learned and you could take away from the last year in both perhaps your personal life and your work life?
I think work life. I think resilience, I guess, a little bit, and I've had to kind of start accepting my MS diagnosis, which I have been rubbish at doing. And I think that's maybe what I've had to take on and just get on with, really. And I think I've learned to try and manage my symptoms and fatigue a little better, although I'm still not very good at that. But I think that's one thing I have learned. And I think just, with work-wise, just new ways of working. Things are deal with modern technology. And I think it's been quite nice that, not having to go off to different areas to do meetings. It's, do MS Teams. We can still see our patients' faces without masks on a video. I can't wait for the day that we maybe don't have to wear so much PPE and I can actually see a patient's face for the first time and they can see mine. Because I might only see my patients once or twice now working diagnostics. So it was so much nicer to actually see more than their eyes. I think that's the main thing. And then just, taking on, like I say, yoga is something that I've found hugely beneficial, and it's really helped with my balance and my leg. So that's been a real help.
That's really good. Do you think, sort of going back to your point you made about you've had to accept when you've felt fatigued and things like that, do you feel that perhaps before this time you sort of just tried to carry on
Definitely.
with your MS, even if your body was sort of saying you needed to stop?
Definitely. At the point of my diagnosis, I buried my head. I didn't want to. I just literally went to the clinic, got told, came back to run my own clinic, just tried to forget about it. My friends were sort of looking at the trust website. I didn't for a very long time, and I still now I do sort of think, why can't I just go off and do that? Why am I so tired today? Why, get home and just flop on the sofa, and because I'm just exhausted, my legs are hurting, and like, why is this? And you just kind of think, actually, this is you. This is now. You just have to adapt. I won't ever let it define me, but I think I have to accept, and I think this has made me have to accept it. It was really difficult, really difficult. Mental health wise was very difficult this time last year, but I think it has brought it to the forefront and made me realise that it is part of me, and I just have to, make the best of it. I think is probably, and do my best to try and carry on as much as I can, and fulfil life as much as I can.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, as you said, it's sort of a good way to live, is sort of the acceptance, but not letting it define you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's really great that you mentioned that your friends sort of had a little look on the website, tried to find out some more information, because sometimes we hear sort of a mix from people that they don't tell their friends because they don't feel comfortable with the potential reaction that they might receive, or some people obviously are completely happy to tell friends and family.
Definitely. And I sort of read that. So when I got my sort of final confirmed diagnosis, I went along to a kind of a new diagnosis group meeting that our MS nursing team ran, and I think there was a lot there that didn't want to tell friends, work colleagues, and actually I kind of thought I would tell them, because I wanted to explain why I was maybe yawning in a meeting, or a bit slower on my legs, and I kind of wanted to explain why that was, and I wasn't just getting old, but I am, but equally that there was another reason for it. And my friends and my husband has been absolutely fantastic. It has affected him initially, and the kids have been fab as well. But yeah, they certainly went to the websites, they looked at information, they knew a lot more about it than I did. I mean, my area is not neurology and nursing. I knew very little about MS. I didn't even know there was 3 different types, so I knew very, very little, and they told me a bit more, and they told me also where to look, which I think some people have found surprising, that I didn't sort of go in there and get as much information. I just did not want to know at all.
Yeah, I guess for you, did you find as well that it's a bit like working as a nurse? People think that you have this certain, as you sort of touched on, this certain level of knowledge, and that you'd want to know all these things.
Completely. I think people really did think I'd know all about it, and I absolutely didn't. And I remember when I had my first consultation with Claire, my MS nurse, and she sort of said, look, I know you're a nurse, and forgive me if you already know this. I was like, no, please, it was just like when I had a baby, I knew nothing, and it just looked like it's not my area of speciality, and I can tell you all about the digestive system and everything like that, but not the nervous system. So she was fantastic, actually, and it was just like I'm just a patient as well as a nurse, but not in this area. So but there was an expectation that people would know, they think I would know everything, and I really still don't. And I think sometimes when I've first heard about MS, you kind of almost think about the worst case scenario, and it's lovely to know that actually there are there's so many people, and actually since I've been diagnosed, there's a few colleagues at work who have come actually said, I also have MS, and that's been quite nice to have actually that face-to-face support as well. And throughout lockdown there was that as well.
You mentioned your MS nurse. Throughout lockdown, have you managed to sort of see her, or what have your MS services sort of looked like during this time?
So like us all, Claire was facing redeployment, and she was redeployed, and I think it went down to very much a skeleton team. I think there was one nurse, and I think the secretary was still there, and that was my complete expectation, because facing that myself, I was in a lecture theatre at the time, full of specialist nurses being told about redeployment. So actually it wasn't something I didn't expect, but she told me, so she emailed me to let me know what was happening, and that I found really, really comforting, actually, to know what was available and where to go for support. And she then returned. She also let me know that she returned. We had a telephone appointment, which was great. She arranged a sort of an MRI, because we weren't sure whether I'd actually relapsed, because my mobility got worse towards the back end of the year, increasing fatigue, a lot more pain. So it was just to make sure I hadn't had a relapse and developed some more lesions. Luckily I hadn't. I think it's just been the impact physically and mentally on the body, really, that the last year's brought on. But I've been access to service wise. I've been able to see my physiotherapist. I've been to orthotics. I've got a new I don't even know an orthotic for my leg from those for helping me walk better with my foot drop. So to be fair, I think we've been really lucky. I feel I've been really lucky that although I knew they were getting redeployed when I've needed them, I've been able to contact.
That's really great to hear then, because obviously you don't want to feel like you can't get in contact with the people that you need the most, especially when it's the most challenging times too.
Absolutely, and I guess I've got the other perspective, that I knew what she's been facing as well, and completely taken out of her hands. And I know this will have been across nationally, the MS nurses, just like every other speciality nursing, will have been pulled away to other areas, and she, and I knew that would be happening. Completely expected that, but I get that for other people, that would have been really difficult to sort of to come to terms with, I guess, because you almost feel like we matter as well, and we have issues, and we need our nurses. But at the time it's just a call to arms, really, and everyone was going where we were absolutely needed, and services were put to a halt completely to be able to manage it.
Yeah, that's true. I think, like you say, it's really good that you could obviously see both sides of it and have that understanding.
Yeah, definitely. I think that did help. I think, yeah.
So sort of looking forward to the future now then. Hopefully it won't be too much longer until some of the restrictions are lifted. Obviously Monday is the discussion of when we're going to be able to go to shops and things like that. What are you sort of most looking forward to for coming out of lockdown? Are there any sort of specific things that you really got your hopes set on to do, or anyone you're looking forward to seeing or anything like that?
I think sitting around the table in the kitchen with family and friends is absolutely on the top of the list for what I'm looking forward to. We've been able to meet, sort of the last back end with the groups of 6 outside, and then it was slowly starting to change, wasn't it? I really missed that. I really can't wait kind of to do that. That's one of the biggest things I'm really looking forward to. In the short term, haircut, that's a real can't wait. And I guess longer term, if I'm honest, it's going to be not sticking a swab up my nose twice a week. Can't wait to not have to do that. And also, hopefully not having to wear all the PPE just to do my job, so I can actually see a patient's face, hold a patient's hand, when I'm giving bad news, because that kind of non-verbal communication, the touch is just gone, and that's really difficult, and I really look forward to getting that back and feel that I can do nursing again properly the way I want to do.
Yeah, I imagine. Do you find that wearing sort of masks and PPE makes your job more challenging in that?
Definitely. I think sadly we've kind of got used to it a little bit now, as have the patients coming in, but you do just feel they can't, you've got the aprons, the gloves, the face mask, the eye protection, they're literally just seeing my eyeballs and my hair, which is a complete state, and it's just the personal touch seems to have gone. These are patients who are highly anxious that they might have a cancer. We're doing investigations and them giving results, and we have to do social distancing, so we're not sat near them that we might do. Luckily for our clinics, we are allowing patients' relatives to come in, but in certain situations they've not been there either, and that's just, it feels awful as a healthcare professional that we're not able to do what we want to do, and the job the way that we strive to, with empathy, and that's been really difficult. So it's definitely been a challenge to perform our job to the best of our abilities, and I do look forward to a time when we can get that back, definitely. And I think some things will be here to stay. The video appointments or telephone appointments is something we've been doing for a while anyway, pre-COVID, but actually it's so much more convenient. I found it really convenient not having to take time off work, do a 60-mile round trip to go see my for an MS appointment that's maybe 10-15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe long. And I think it's actually quite nice to be able to just nip out at work and talk to my consultant or my nurse over the phone. So I quite like that. I know a lot of people maybe don't, but for me it works.
Yeah, definitely. You have a point there. I've heard from a lot of people that they're hoping to keep a mix of these sort of video calls and in real life meetings. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's just convenient in many ways, because it's sometimes quite a bit of a hassle, getting there and back, and also when you're in your own environment you're kind of a little bit more relaxed and perhaps more honest than you maybe would if you were sat in a consultant room with loads of people around. So I think that actually helps, and I think and I think we found that through my work, that when we do telephone appointments you do get a more honest situation than you maybe do with someone face to face. Obviously, the flip side of that, some people really don't like it and much prefer to be with someone face to face and have that conversation. But I do think it's got its massive benefits, and I hope it is, here to stay in many specialities.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks so much for chatting with me today and being part of our podcast for MS Awareness Week. It's been really great to hear about your experiences during lockdown.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm glad to share. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here's where there would be an advert. But as we're a charity, we don't do that. So instead, we'd like to take the opportunity to tell you a about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Our website, which is www.mstrust.org.uk, has tons of information and resources for people affected by MS.
If you're struggling to get in contact with your MS nurse, or if you don't have a MS nurse at all, go to our resources tab on the website and click on MS services near me, and it will bring up a map to show you who is in your area, and you can contact them from there. And if you're still struggling, you can always give the MS Trust a call. We were talking to Mel just now, who is obviously a key worker and a nurse. And that brings us onto the topic of MS nurses and what happened to them during lockdown. And with me now is David Martin, our CEO at the MS Trust. Hi, David. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to see you, Helena.
And could I ask you to talk us through what happened to the MS nurses during the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, so for the MS nurses that we'd already appointed by the MS Trust, we obviously stayed in touch with them. So Paru and Megan and the team had stayed in touch with them as part of the coaching and development and the mentoring. But then what we found is that services started to change, that some of the MS nurses that we'd appointed were actually being redeployed into the wider NHS, effectively trying to support the NHS and those people with COVID-19. So we stayed in touch with those nurses, but actually, even though they weren't supporting people living with MS at that time, we thought it was the right thing to do to stay in touch, to continue to support them, but of course also talk to their management teams as well to try to make sure that if they were redeployed, that they came back to the MS services as quickly as possible.
Because I think we've found a lot of people sort of said during the first lockdown that it was quite hard to get in touch with their MS nurses. They eventually came back to them, but it wasn't as instant as it's sort of been.
I know, and we heard, didn't we, from lots of people who were, they'd been told officially that maybe their services were formally staying open, but sometimes, they were trying to ring up and couldn't get through. They couldn't get through an email. So we had a record number of calls to our inquiry line, to Simon and the team in the inquiry line, and we did our utmost. Obviously, we are not MS nurses. We don't have those people's medical notes, but at least we were there to try and help and support as much as possible and try and ensure that people were able to manage their own conditions until a time when their service restarted.
Yeah, and I mean the team was absolutely super busy answering all these questions, and this was during the time where a lot of our staff was on furlough as well. So
yeah, it was really hard, wasn't it? It was really challenging. And we had about half of our staff so we've only got 30 staff at the MS Trust, and around half of them were on furlough for about half of last year, as we did our utmost to balance the books. But as some people might know this, Helena, but the reality is, roughly for every 83p we spend at the MS Trust, that comes in from traditional fundraising. So people running for us, people doing cake sales for us, people jumping out of planes for us. So, and of course, because people couldn't go outside during lockdown, all of that just simply stopped. And when the London Marathon was stopped last year in 2020, that on that one day alone, we lost £160,000. So in a sense, we had to tighten our belts very quickly to make sure that the MS Trust was still here in 2021 and beyond.
So that meant also that we had to pause the MS Nurse program, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at it, and I remember talking to Para this time last year, and we had 3 nurses who we were about to appoint up and down the country, including one in Liverpool and one in London. And we felt, well, we could put those people in place, but we've been given the money by our supporters to support people living with MS. And it was very clear that we could have appointed those people, and they could have been immediately redeployed into the wider NHS. So we thought, from an MS point of view, let's pause those appointments, let's just hold, and let's see what happens over the next 12 months or so. So we had to stop those appointments last year, and I must admit, I felt really bad about that, because we come to work, don't we, to support people living with MS as well as we possibly can. And having the money to appoint 3 additional MS nurses and not appointing them seemed fundamentally wrong. But what we did is we protect that money, we kept that money, and a couple of weeks ago, we actually agreed with our trustees to restart the program. So we've already agreed that we're going to appoint another 3 MS nurses this year into the NHS, and we're moving so quickly that the interviews are taking place any day now for a new MS nurse at the Walton in Liverpool. So we're really kicking on. We had a big pause last year, but we're now trying to make sure that the new normal includes new nurses, hopefully in London and hopefully in Liverpool too.
I mean, that is brilliant news. And I mean, we're back as well at work, aren't we? So the furlough means coming to an end. So we're hoping ever so slowly that life will come back to normal.
Yeah, and it is hard, isn't it? And whatever that normal might be. But I think it's made everybody realise, and I know there's been challenges up and down the country with some of the MS nurses being redeployed and some of the services actually being closed for some of the time. Some are only available by email and by phone. And I know the services bent over backwards to ensure that there was support still there. But I know I've spoken to a number of nurses, a number of neurologists who felt really, really guilty that they couldn't provide the service that they wanted to. So I know everybody's now coming together and thinking, all right, what can we do to make sure that the service continues in the future, whatever might happen with COVID? But also the bigger challenge is what happens with, those waiting lists for MS services and the broader neurology services have really increased over the last year, probably between 30 and 50%. So the need for the additional MS nurses we're going to provide at the MS Trust is there more than ever. So hopefully we'll provide at least 3 this year. If we can get even more money in from fundraising, maybe we can do even more than 3.
So, I mean, it's a ginormous job to do, but it sounds like you're quite excited about the future then.
Yeah, I don't want to put too much pressure on our health professionals team, but we know the difference that these MS nurses can make. They are wonderful people. Every single one of them, they make such a difference. It's almost like they wave a wand and the magic happens. And, I spoke to so many people living with MS who say, yeah, neurologists are wonderful and the members team are wonderful. But actually, you look at the brilliant report from the MS Society, My MS, My Needs. It shows how fundamental that MS nurse role is. There's a shortage of around 100 up and down the country. We've put an additional 7 in from the MS Trust so far. I'd love to get that into double figures by the end of this year, and then let's see what we can kick on. But yeah, it's a really critical role in the whole of the MS service, but we need more and more MS nurses. So I think there's one thing I do when I come to work is make sure we provide as many additional MS nurses into the NHS as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Helena.
Right. I thought it was quite interesting to hear what David was saying about the MS nurses feeling guilty about, being deployed elsewhere and not being able to help people with MS. And that kind of tied in a little bit with what Mel was saying about feeling guilty when she couldn't actually do what she wanted to do because of her MS. I mean, 2 completely different things to feel guilty about, but it's that when you're in the key worker role that you're so used to being there and be able to help, and then when you get stopped, it must be super frustrating.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Sort of, obviously, we've understood a lot of the pressures that the NHS has faced during this time. But I think when you're trying to reach your MS nurse or something, you often can feel really frustrated if you can't get through to them, and it's easy to forget the human side of it, and that they might be feeling equally frustrated because they want to help and they chose that profession because that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah. And I think also, likewise, for people with MS, they might feel guilty for bothering the NHS because they know how swamped they are. But I think that this is a really important point to make, that if you are worried about your health, if you're having new symptoms or if you're having a relapse, don't push that onto the back burner thinking, well, somebody else is worse off, because your health is really important. And I think from the reports and things that we have seen about MS services and people progressing because they haven't been to their appointments, like with physios and things like that, is super important. That don't, if you are worried, do contact your MS nurse or your GP or your MS team, or even give the MS Trust a call, and we will try and help you out sorting out so you get to talk to a health professional, because I think it is extremely important.
Yeah, definitely. I think Mel sort of touched upon it. If you need to get in contact with your nurse, get in contact. And if it means that it will take a couple of weeks or a couple of days for them to get back to you, then so be it. But at least you've sort of reached out because you are admitting that you might need that support at this time.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes it can actually surprise you that you can get in touch with nurses fairly quickly. I had an appointment during lockdown, which was nothing to do with MS. And I was worried that it was going to be one of these, oh, well, it's not so important, so therefore you won't be seen. But I was seen within 2 weeks of making the appointment. So I think we shouldn't assume before we've tried. So I think it's definitely better to pick up that phone or email your nurse rather than not.
Yeah.
I'm also really happy to hear, that our program is back on the road to get more nurses in post, because it was, I was furloughed, and this was before you started last year, wasn't it? So we weren't actually involved in the whole situation, but I know from keeping in touch with the information team how extremely busy they were with all the questions and people who couldn't get a hold of their nurse. So I think we had at the MS Trust a super busy year as well. And obviously now when we're back with the full staff, I think hopefully we can really do a good job with trying to help people with MS in any way we can, be that answering questions or getting more nurses into post.
I think it's really bringing, even though we're not fully there yet, I think it's definitely reiterating that we are moving more towards a sense of normality, which is really good.
Yeah. And it's not going to be a super quick fix, is it? It's going to take a while, but just rest assured that we are here and we're doing all we can.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really easy to say that you're doing things, but actions like this really show and can really make a difference. Yeah.
And I think, doing this series of podcasts and hearing people's stories and it's been nice to hear the sort of the varied stories. Today we had a key worker, but we've had, people being pregnant and people who were newly diagnosed, and then just people getting on with life during lockdown. It's been really interesting to hear. And we want to keep on hearing the stories. So even though this is the last one for MS Awareness Week, we want your story. So keep on, contacting us, sending us in blogs and be in future podcasts. It would just be, we want to hear from you. We want to hear how life has been, and sharing these stories to just help the general public as well to find out what life with MS is like. Yeah, true. I think there's a slogan on our website that sort of says, the more we talk about MS, the more others can understand it. And I think that really summarises it well. Yeah. Definitely. Well, everybody's talking about it being the snowflake disease and how different it is. And my experiences are very different from anyone else's. You can just hear that when you talk about diagnosis stories. We've had some interesting ones this week, people being diagnosed after they had an fly into their eye and and things like that. It's the feeling warm water being cold water. It's so strange. MS can be so weird. And I think you wouldn't really know what was happening to you if you get these symptoms, if you have no sort of knowledge of MS. So all these stories and sharing them is just a really good way of raising awareness. So remember that if you have any questions about MS, we're always here for you. Our inquiry service is available Monday to Friday, except UK bank holidays. That's from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of these hours, you're welcome to leave us a message and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. You can also find us on social media, so on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on Spotify, Google and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. Get in touch and like they say, like and subscribe. And we would also like us to say a big thank you to Anne Chapman Audio for providing the theme tune to this podcast. Thanks, Emma. Thank you.